Okie dokie. Good morning, Boston. Thank you for coming. Very nice to see you here. My name is Stella Kramer, and I'm a photo editor and creative consultant, and I'm introducing the great Tony Fouhse, who will be speaking about his career, about his documentary work. And later today, after this one, we have a panel, we have a speaker, Tina Ahrens, who'll talk about a crowdfunding site called Emphasis. If you don't know about that, please make sure you stay. This evening, we have the Battery Wharf Jazz Party that'll be here at the Fairmont Battery Wharf. That starts at 5 o'clock, so don't miss that. There are photos, exhibits on the walls here, Humble Arts, Eileen Smithson and Maxine Helfman, and upstairs we have the Flash Forward 2011 Group Show Exhibition and the Mini Book Fair hosted by Printed Matter and Indie Photo Book Library, so don't miss those. We want to thank our sponsors, as always, TD Bank for being with the Flash Forward Festival since the beginning, and our wonderful hosts, the Fairmont Battery Wharf. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Tony Fouhse. In this lecture, he'll talk about the unexpected turns of working on a documentary project and the necessary decisions required of artists when real life knocks on your door. Tony is an Ottawa-based editorial and commercial photographer. He also spends a lot of time and emotion shooting personal projects. Tony's personal projects have been exhibited throughout North America and in Europe, as well as being featured in publications such as the New York Times, Esquire Russia, Newsweek Japan, LifeLounge Australia, CV Photo Canada, and the British Journal of Photography. Tony has been nominated for 3 National Magazine Awards, won once, and in 2010 he was presented with the Karsh Award for Photography. Without further ado, Tony Fouhse.
Thank you, Stella. Thank you for coming. I understand it's Pride Day in Boston today, so I wish there'd been a rainbow banner here instead of the green and the blue. I'd like to thank Marianne and all the board of directors of Magenta for putting this on. I think it's a fantastic thing. I've had a really good time in Boston since I've been here. I met a lot of amazing photographers, and Eileen did a talk yesterday where she highlighted some of the photography going on in Boston, and my jaw dropped. I was amazed at the breadth and the cohesion and just how good so much of the photography happening in Boston is today. So it's a real pleasure to be here. This talk is probably going to represent my brain a little. There's nothing really planned except a general direction. There's no notes. The only prompts I have are the photographs and the memories and thoughts that they're going to provoke. And it's probably going to be a little disjointed and confused. Thoughts that are going to go nowhere, sentences that will end midstream, and kind of bumbly, maybe a little repetitive. And did I say repetitive? Yeah, okay. So anyway, I'm going to start. The way I like to practice photography is I like to get lost. I like to go places. I like to have experiences. And the photographs I take, I like to consider just really souvenirs of those experiences. So I kind of think that if there's any art to what I do, it's the sort of social interaction aspect of my practice rather than the actual taking of the photographs. And in 2007, I thought that, and I should also say that a lot of what I do, in fact, most of what I do for myself is in collaboration with the subjects. I go places, I meet people, we have conversations, and then I say, well, this is the subtext. Can I recontextualize you? Will you work with me to help me do that? And I'm amazed at how many people say yes. But in 2007, I thought that I wanted to go out at dusk and photograph people in little scenarios. I wanted to set up little scenarios. I've been looking at a lot of European art, Caravaggio, people like that. And I went out to about 4 or 5 different locations and met some people and sort of tried to do it, and nothing. I'd go home, get the film process, look at it, and I was always disappointed. Nothing really seemed to be gelling, or people were in too much of a hurry, because a lot of what I do relies on people having time on their hands. So when I travel, I often go to places like laundromats and tire stores and stuff like that. So I said to Ben, who's my assistant, I said, let's go to the corner of Cumberland and Murray in Ottawa, where a lot of crack addicts hang out because they always seem to have time on their hands. So we went down there and we sort of unloaded all the gear, and everyone was looking at us with great suspicion and confusion. And we sort of felt like fish out of water, and there was lots of suspicion. And we talked to a few of the people there, and nothing really was happening. So I said to Ben, this isn't working, let's go somewhere else. And as we were loading the gear in the car, an addict named Archie walked by, and he saw that we had this photo gear, and he came up to me and he said, are you looking for a subject? And I said, dude, that's exactly what I'm looking for. So he said, you can take my picture. And let me go to the first picture here. So this is the first picture I took that evening. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, and when they saw how I was working the society on that corner, there was a kind of an interest, because they saw that I was collaborating with the person, and we were shooting Polaroids and showing them, and it seemed to be respectful and not like, I guess typically addicts are represented by, people stand down the road with long lenses and take pictures of them doing nasty stuff, and I was interested in sort of a different kind of cliche, I guess. I mean, we all work with cliches. It's just that some cliches are maybe better than others, or better. Yeah, I'll say better. So afterwards, Josh and Tiffany came up, and they said, yes, you can take our picture. And so we sort of worked together, and Tiffany decided to lay down, and Josh decided to lay there. And then this is Ahmed, and he also thought that he would do something kind of dramatic. So we did that. I went away, I got the film back, and when I saw the negatives, I knew right away, this is a place and a group of people I really wanted to work with. I was kind of mesmerized by their openness and their honesty. I'm a commercial photographer and an editorial photographer, and I go to lots of places, top floor corner offices. I photograph a lot of middle management and the bourgeoisie. And one of the things I've noticed about them is they believe they have a lot to lose, so they're very careful in terms of how honest they'll be with the camera. This society that I was working with, the thing that really sort of amazed me about them was how honest they were prepared to be. So when I got the film back, I did some scans, and I made some prints, and I went back down and I found the people, because they're always down there, and I gave them prints, and other people looked at them and became very interested in the approach I was taking, because no one had ever thought of actually going up and talking to them before and saying, you have agency, I'm a photographer, let's work together and try to represent an aspect of your fact. So, and I'm going to show these in chronological order rather than the edit, and I should also say that this project, which is called User, is, I think, very much about photography and process. It led to another project called Live Through This, which is really not about photography at all. It's just about a guy with a camera and a girl he met. So when I went back, we started working with the people, and photographing crack addicts is difficult enough. Trying to focus a Hasselblad in daylight is difficult enough. But doing that at night with a Hasselblad was insane. I mean, we were using very long exposures. I had a studio light that I was shooting onto them. I had to balance the ambient, and the exposures were so long that sometimes I'd wait for a car to swing around a corner, and we would also use the car lights in them. So there's lots and lots of mixed light. And I would say probably at least half of the frames I got back were out of focus or blurred or unusable. And then, of course, the other half that were technically right, I mean, probably 90% of those that sucked as images. So it's just a matter of rooting through and finding the ones that kind of work. One of the things I do a lot when I don't know what to do, and I usually don't know what to do, is I look for marks on the ground. And if I'm in a boardroom and I'm not exactly sure where to start setting up a shot to photograph a CEO, I look to see if there's a paper clip on the ground or a piece of paper or a stain, and then that's where I start, because to me, the idea of starting is the most difficult thing. And all I want to do is just sort of start, because I'm stopped, I want to start and I want to move forward. And it's very much bumbling and getting lost and trying to figure stuff out. So with Yvonne, this is the parking lot, and they had put little red things around the bits they needed patching. So I had just asked him to stand in there because I didn't know where else to ask him to stand. And then once he stood there, I kind of thought, well, okay, this, I know, to me it looks like a transportation pod or something, or it looks like some weird alien mark. And then I asked him to put his hand on his head, and there we go. And you can see, I'll use my little mouse here. You can see this is a car going by. You can see how long the exposures were. So, and again, a lot of my work, I like to make them look like documents, but I also want to somehow inject the idea that there's some kind of contract between the subject and myself. And sometimes it's more obvious and sometimes it's less obvious. In terms of photographing crack addicts, when you look at this series of work, you would have to think that either I'm a really, really patient person, which I'm not, or that there has been some kind of agreement between the subjects and me to hold still and to pose for these photographs. To me, in terms of the document, and I don't even think these are documents, I call them portraits, but that's a much more honest approach, because I don't believe in, and here I always get objectivity and subjectivity confused, I don't believe in objectivity. I think that every photographer, even the photojournalists, they stand in a spot, they choose to press the button at a specific time, they end up with reams of photographs, and then they pick 4. So I'm not exactly sure how that can be described as objectivity. There's always a hand and a brain behind the choice of the image. And in my work, I like to try to inject aspects of that into it, because I think it's just a more honest way to go about it. She was looking at Ben's ass. Ben, my assistant, he was just down off to the down there, and he has, I guess, quite a nice one. So she was kind of amused by it. And here you can see the sort of the mix of the light, the strobe, and the cars, and the ambient light I was using. This is Lori Pye. Once again, a lot of these people I photographed 4 or 5 times a year, and I spent 4 years. This all took place on about 30-meter strip of sidewalk. So I was going there over and over and over again, and I got to know these people, and I would photograph them in over various times and through the years. So and I was there for 4 years, like I said, and as the project sort of expanded, I ended up with lots of choices to make about whether to try to show that sort of the fact that I was there over and over and over, and here's people in, from one year to the next, or whether I wanted to just sort of edit down to portraits, which is in the end what I did. I thought that I tried many ways to edit this all together, and in the end I decided that it was in fact a series of portraits, so I sort of eliminated the whole, the aspect of these images being taken over of the same people over a period of time. So this is Jonathan. Jonathan was a heroin addict. I got to know Jonathan pretty well. This was in 2007. In 2009, his girlfriend Angie died of an overdose, and he sort of went off the rails. A lot of addicts, I mean, I'm not sure how you think addicts operate, but a lot of them, it's a job. They get up, they break into your car, or they prostitute themselves, they get some money, they go buy drugs, and they can do that over and over and over, and they can be addicts for, well, one of the women I know, Dakota, she's 57, and she's been an addict since she was 13. So it's I mean, some of them die, but many of them just endure. And Angie died, and he sort of went off the rails and got arrested because he was being stupid. And he had a choice of going to jail or going to drug court in Canada. Drug court is a place where they'll arrange for rehab for you. So he went to rehab, and he got straight. And I met him probably about 4 or 5 times over the next year or 14 months. And like all addicts, or most addicts, I should say, when they stop taking drugs, they gain a lot of weight. So he gained probably 80 or 90 pounds. And he started playing ball hockey to get into shape. And he was playing ball hockey one afternoon, and he ran into the end of his stick and died of internal bleeding. So the irony is that if he was still a heroin addict, I would probably still be able to go down to the block and talk to him. But the fact of him getting straight and wanting to get in shape was the thing that killed him. So I mean, there's a million ironies, and I have a million of these stories because they all have stories. This is John. I was looking at a lot of European paintings while I was doing this, and really interested in a sense, over-the-top drama. This is Jessica and Melissa, and they actually had been thinking about how they wanted me to take their picture, and one evening I was there photographing, and they came up with a little milk crate and said, we finally figured out what we want you to do. And they sat down, and that was the only change I made is I asked Jessica to straighten her leg. She had both her knees bent originally. And I probably took 4 or 5 frames, and that was it. The funny thing is the serendipity of it all, because if one of them had been wearing a yellow shirt or a red shirt, this image wouldn't have worked. But the fact that they were both in sort of blacky blue shirts with patterns on is what makes the image work. So, I mean, all photographers rely on certain amounts of luck. But I also think if you work hard enough, you can make your own luck. This is Jimmy, Bonnie, and Alicia. I don't know if you can see the tattoo. It says the infamous Bonnie. He was in Archambault Federal Penitentiary for 17 years, where he got that tattoo. These two were partners in crime. They would hit you on the head and take your money. A lot of people asked me if I was afraid when I was down there working with them. And I wasn't, because I quickly realized that because it was a collaborative process, because I was respecting and not judging them, and allowing them to participate in the process, they actually considered me, in a way, one of their own. And I would leave gear across the street, and an addict would come and bring it over to me. The second year I was there, we were shooting some video, and I was using a generator to power my lights. And we had a sort of quite a long extension cord quite a bit down the road, because we didn't want the noise to happen. And it was a Sunday, and there was a lot of people there that I didn't know. And I turned off the generator and went back to talk to Jennifer, who I'd just been photographing. And I looked, but 30 seconds later, I looked down and my generator was gone. And I thought, okay, I can kiss that $1,000 goodbye, because that will buy quite a bit of drugs. I go home. About half an hour later, Keith, one of the addicts there, phones me up. He says, we got your generator back. And I said, what? He says, yeah, come to the block and we'll give it to you. So I drove down. He was sitting there on the curb, and he handed it over, and I said, do you want some money? Or he says, no, we just want you to have it, because we understand if you don't have it, you can't continue the project. And I said, well, what's the story? And he says, you don't want to know. But I found out later that they'd found the people that had stolen the generator. They'd roughed them up and said, don't screw with that guy's stuff, because he's doing a thing with us. So at that point, I kind of knew that there was a relationship developing, and this was this was actually the second year, so it was like 2 years into the project. But even so, partway through the first year, I really understood that the collaborative aspect of this was really important to them. I call this particular body of work user, and I call it user because I use them, they use drugs, and in a way, they were using me. They were using me as a conduit to the outside world. And you could actually see them while I was getting ready, preparing themselves, putting on the face that they wanted people to see. So there was a lot of them contributing to this project. Jimmy is straight. He phoned me up. Well, his sponsor phoned me up about 2 years after I took this picture and told me that he'd gone to rehab and that he was straight, and I went to meet him. His tattoo was much bigger because he'd gained a whole lot of weight. He was in a suit, he'd finished his high school, and he had a driver's license. He was so proud that, and he still actually is straight. He's one of the ones where the rehab stuck. Alicia, I met about 4 months ago on the street, and she has full-blown AIDS and probably has about 4 or 5 months to live. This is Harmony. And typically I wouldn't photograph the people if they were too screwed up, if they were really high. I didn't want to photograph the addict, I wanted to photograph the person. In this case, Harmony was kind of screwy, and again, I didn't know what to do, and I asked her to lean against the mailbox, and she leaned there and she fell over. And this is a picture of her falling over, and I wasn't sure I got it, so I said, Harmony, will you fall over for me again? And she picked herself up and she leaned there and tried to balance, and she fell over again. And if you look at the film, you'll see a series of 6 images of Harmony falling over, which brings up another point about this work, about exploitation. And when James Estrin at the New York Times ran this stuff on his Lens blog, the first 2 years of the project, and about 8 hours after he put it up, he tweeted that all hell was breaking loose. This work was getting attacked from around the world. People were considered it exploitation, and they considered it glamorization, and they considered it making art out of human misery, and because they're not documents. And I think a lot of the confusion about this work is when people look at it, they're not exactly sure if they're portraits, if they're documents, if it's sociology, or if it's anthropology. So it sort of falls into a whole bunch of those cracks. There's aspects of all of that in this work. I decided to stand back and just let the comments unroll, and about 30 comments later, a really interesting thing started to happen, is that the people started writing in and attacking the people who were attacking me. So it's definitely sparked a dialogue. But the most beautiful thing to me was right near the end of the comment stream, Tracy, who's a woman I photographed this is 2007, these pictures in 2008, wrote in and she said, I'm slide number 17, I'm that woman. And she went on to say how she remembered the day I photographed her, how she remembered our conversation, how she thought it was important that people see aspects of their fact that normally you wouldn't. And I sort of got chills. It almost brought a tear to my eye because it seemed to be closing the loop. And Morgan, I forget who I said it was, but it was Morgan who wrote in. Morgan emailed me last August and told me that she had got straight, she had finished her high school and had enrolled in and been accepted in a photography program in Ottawa. And she told me it was because of those 15 minutes I spent with her. And I'm not up here to say that I saved her life. All I'm saying is that when you go out into the world and you make contact with people, you never know. It's like throwing a stone in the pond. The ripples go out and you never exactly know what those ripples are going to cause. In this case, it gave her an idea of a way forward. So, which I thought was kind of interesting because she told me she used to work in a pet shop and she actually wanted to be a veterinary assistant, but then she turned into a photography student. This is Greg. He looks like he could live next door to you. Well, and he's not particularly stylish, but I know when these pictures were rolling out, one of the comments I got was sort of how stylish crack addicts could be. And the other thing is, I mean, Greg, this is in 2007. I met him probably 2 or 3 months ago. I was down on the block just talking to the people, and he looks exactly the same. He just looks like a regular blue-collar working guy. This is Candace and Todd. Candace is dead, Todd's in jail. And once again, this is an idea they brought to me. I was there making myself available. I'm not saying that all these pictures are the subjects saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. A lot of times it's me scratching my head and saying, stand here, do this, that sucks, let's move down the road to find a better spot, so on and so forth. But even in that situation, there was a lot of juju that the subjects brought to the shoot. This is Kathy looking at her stomach. That's Kathy standing against a mailbox. That's Bubbles. She just happened to have an apple in her hand that day. And once I did these, and we showed them in Ottawa at the gallery, and the gallery that I show at is, this is the corner I was photographing them on, and right here is the gallery where I was showing the images. I wasn't in there to take the pictures and run. I didn't parachute in. I was on that block over and over and over again. And if people had beef, they would come up to me. One of the agreements we had is that I would never show any of the images without showing them first and getting their approval. They almost always said, yeah, they didn't even want to look at them. They loved having the pictures. And in fact, they would often ask me for copies so they could send to their mother or their father or their sons or their daughters. Occasionally there was a certain amount of discussion that came up because people weren't quite sure about how they were being represented, so we would have those discussions. Passers-by would also attack me when I was working. This work was sort of known in Ottawa, and a lot of times people just sort of walk by and say, you should be ashamed of what you're doing. This is disgusting. You know, you're exploiting these people. The interesting thing was the people would never stop to discuss. These are people in suits. They would always walk by and sort of mutter it out the side of their mouth. And one day I ran after someone who said that, and I pulled them back, and I said, just a minute. I was photographing Greg. This is Greg right here. And I turned to Greg and I said, do you think you're being exploited? And he said, no, I'm not being exploited. And I turned to the guy in the suit and I said, so, like, do you understand what you're talking about? Or is this just like a knee-jerk reaction? I'm not interested in knee-jerks. I'm not interested in lip service. Unless you come down here and spend time and actually talk to people, then maybe you shouldn't criticize what you don't understand. The other comment I got about some of these was people said that those aren't crack addicts. And I would say, what do you mean they're not crack addicts? And they would say, you can't do that with crack addicts. And I said, you can't do what with crack addicts? You can't have conversations, you can't collaborate, you can't create something together. And they would go, no, you can't. And I'd say, well, have you ever talked to a crack addict? And they would say, no. And then I'm going, well, maybe instead of walking by and judging, you should go and bring them some food and start talking to them. You can have conversations with these people. So in a way, I thought that was a pretty good response to the work. After that first year was so successful, and I began to know these people and have relationships with them, and I didn't want to change them. I didn't want to judge them. I didn't want to colonize them. I didn't want to proselytize anything to them. I just wanted to collaborate with them and try to take interesting pictures. So I thought, okay, well, I want to go back because this is a very interesting population. And then I thought to myself, what's the exact opposite of what I just did? And what I decided to do was large format portraits of, initially I thought I was going to photograph the men and the women. But after doing some of the men, after starting doing men and women, I quickly realized that and this is an aesthetic decision, that the men kind of looked uninteresting and just like bikers. But the women I was interested in because they had vestiges of femininity that they brought forward. Partly it's because of how they have to make a living. They have to sort of pull themselves together so when they stand in the corner, some man might find them attractive. But also there is a difference between the sexes in terms of what they felt was important ways to represent themselves. So I began just photographing women, and the other reason I began photographing just women is what you don't see in these images is what I was doing, and I think what a photographer's job is you turn chaos into order. You go out into the whole world, and the whole world is chaotic, and you have to stand in a spot. You have to stand in a spot and put a frame around something, and somehow create order out of that. And behind me and around me, every time I was down there was chaos. People fighting, people taking drugs, people giving blowjobs, just craziness. And someone would be yelling in one ear and someone would be yelling in another ear, and I'm trying to focus the camera. And I mean, that's another way to look at that. This is one way to look at a population of addicts. There's a million ways to look at anything. So that was the other reason. I started saying, listen, I only want to photograph women this year, so the men would go away and go about other business. So what that did is it eliminated half of the chaos I had to deal with. So that was a purely practical reason of eliminating it. Once I started doing the large format portraits, I also realized that I was working with cliché. This, by the way, is Morgan, the woman who is now straight and studying photography. But I was also dealing with cliche. The first images were kind of cliche in the sense of they were dramatic and sort of overblown and very painterly, and a romantic almost look at addiction and this group of addicts. And when I started photographing the women, I realized that, and I don't consume much pornography, but a number of years ago, many years ago, before the internet and porn was like available at your desktop, I thought, I'm an image maker, I want to go and look at some pornography. So I went down to the Annex, which is the used pornography store in Ottawa, and just think of used pornography. It's like, okay, who used it? How did they use it? How hard did they use it? But anyway, so I bought probably about a foot of pornography, and I started looking at pornography and how the sexes were represented and what the points of view were and stuff like that. And one thing that I think I kind of knew, but also became very clear by looking at it, was first of all, I was looking at it, I was thinking, dude, like, I don't want to see, not dude, ma'am, I don't want to see your cervix, thank you very much. But the second thing in general was that the women look into the lens. There's a doe-eyed, come hither acceptance of the male gaze, where the men are hardly ever looking into the lens. And I think that's with the viewer in mind. The viewer, male viewers of pornography don't really want to look into the dude's eyes. They want to look into the woman's eyes. So I realized that I was working with cliche and with them just by the way I was doing it. And then that idea also kind of, I started to really think about that, how the cliches can operate. And to me, it's a subtext of this whole work. Like, a lot of people don't really see it as cliche, but I think it's kind of an important aspect of what I was doing. The fact that drug addicts, by and large, are portrayed in cliche ways. And here what I was doing is I was going in and portraying them in a cliche way of my own. So, but once again, I was really struck by the nature of the femininity. And I thought the headshots were actually going to be the easiest thing I would ever do. It's like, after all, the women stand there, they look into the lens, and you take the picture. It required, because I was using a large 4x5 camera, it required quite a bit of concentration on their part. When you're this close to a person with a 4x5, oop, I keep doing that, I'm going to move it. You have about this much depth of field, and you have to focus with the thing over your head, and you got to like put the film in and close the lens, and if they moved an inch, I would have to take it, sort of start at square one and say, no, you can't move. So I really believe, and I'm not sort of going to get into film versus digital or gear or anything, but I really believe that the tool you bring to the job does have an effect on what the images end up looking like, not necessarily because you're shooting film or digital, but because different tools require different processes by the photographer and by the subject. So just like in the night shots, where I was asking them to stand still and to strike poses and stuff like that, this also brought a lot. They needed to bring a lot of discipline to it. This picture is one of the ones where when I showed her the picture, she was a little upset, because she said, I usually, before I'm photographed, I pull myself together, and I look horrible. And I said, well, first of all, I don't think you look horrible for a crack addict. And second of all, when I look at this, I'm not looking at that, I'm looking in your eyes. And that goes back to shooting the women with 4x5. When I started editing them, I realized that the way I had to edit them was by the look in their eyes. It had to be, there had to be something there, a soul, because that's, like I said, I didn't want to photograph the addict, I wanted to photograph the person. So we had quite a bit of discussion, and in the end, it was okay. I could run this picture. This picture appeared on the New York Times Lens blog, and her family saw it, and they didn't know she was an addict. And the father came down to the corner, and he told her that he didn't want anything to do with her anymore, that she wasn't welcome at home, and that as far as he was concerned, she didn't exist anymore. So she told me this afterwards, and I was kind of rocked. I mean, I knew these images were going to have repercussions, but I wasn't quite prepared for that. And I asked her how she felt about it, and she said, well, you know, it's done. One of the things about dealing with addicts is there's a lot of fatalism involved. This is what I am, and you know, life is going to unroll, and there's really, I think they often feel a loss of control, except for that pure line they're on in the morning when they get up, and they don't have to deal with the societal crap that you and I have to deal with, dealing with your boss and the kids and walking the dog. Their line is pure. They get up in the morning, money and drugs. It's a straight line. I think also that aspect talks a lot about why a lot of addicts are addicts. And I know if I saw if my son or daughter was an addict and I didn't know, and I learned that they were an addict, I would go to them and try to help them. But in her case, her father came to her and pushed her away. And I don't know, I'm speculating, but that leads me to believe that the upbringing you come from has a lot to do with where you end up in your life. And obviously her family was never supportive in the beginning. And that, I'm sure, had quite a bit of effect on the path her life took. The other thing I learned from talking and getting to know these people is that probably, I would say 80 or 90% of them are there because of sexual abuse. When you get up in the morning, when you're older, and if you have a choice of thinking about being raped by your uncle for 4 years, or where can I get a $10 rock of crack cocaine, you pick your poison. And a lot of it is to just try to move the horror of their past behind them. Once you hurt someone when they're growing up, I think they're damaged forever. This is Jennifer, Chantal. This is Dakota. She came to me a year and a half later. Well, actually, I'm really good friends with Dakota. She just published a book of poetry, by the way. And she was very happy. She had this image because it showed her breasts, and about a year later, she had a double mastectomy. Both her breasts were removed. The last time I saw her, she told me she had leukemia, and she's probably also going to die pretty soon. This is Cheryl. She could be, again, your next door neighbor. That's Catherine, who was looking at her belly the first year. Catherine is in Cornwall, living in Cornwall now, and straight. While I was shooting these 4x5 images, my assistant was taking point-and-shoot pictures of me, and I should maybe describe a little the situation. It's a 30-meter strip of sidewalk, and I was standing on the north side. So we were mostly working in shade, and I was shooting into, using as a background for these, the buildings across the way, which were in light. With the 4x5 stuff, I had a big softbox above my camera. You can see in her eyes there, just sort of filling it in. But I was working mostly in open shade. And my assistant was taking pictures, and when I was looking at them, I saw that there was lots of sort of heavy backlight and things silhouetted, and a lot of very ghostly aspects to it. So when I went back the next year to photograph the man, thinking of the idea of cliché, what I decided to do was to use the heavy backlight and to use the ghostly quality to work with the man. And this is very typical of me too. Most people will tell you if you're doing a series, everything has to look the same. I get bored. So each year I went and I photographed in a completely different way, and in the end I had to mash all this stuff together and try to find some thread that would unify the 4 years that I was photographing there. But I also think that what shooting it in different ways talks to is the fact that you can go to a place and you can actually, there are different ways to represent the same thing. You know, I brought my own aesthetic predilections to it, and as I'm sure you would bring your aesthetic predilections to anything you do. But to me, it was interesting and important that, and an aspect of the work, that yes, there are different ways to represent the same population, and I wanted to try to do that in this body of work. So the man I was interested in photographing in kind of He-Man poses and very ghostly. I was fascinated by their bodies. I thought the bodies were just so amazing to look at. And again, you know, sometimes they'd be walking down the street with a prop. This is Greg again. This is 3 years later. He still looks the same. His underwear say, "Play hard." That's Michael. He just reached up to scratch his nose and I missed the shot, so I asked him to do it again. Like I say, many of these look like documents, but they're actually portraits in that things have been orchestrated. And if I go back to the shot of Brennan here, you'll notice this strip of light going right down here. He had to stand in the exact right spot and lean the exact right angle to have that light strike the thing. So again, there is a lot of discipline that I asked for from the subjects. This is a Joss. If he was in this room, he would be the smartest person here. This guy is amazing. He's got a brain that just won't stop, but he's a little, and well, this is him, I guess, one day, and this is him another day. And when I was photographing him, he started to act out. He started to play way too much to the camera. So I said, Joss, okay, that's it. I'm stopping because I mean, it's not real anymore. You're just trying to present some kind of public image of yourself that you think is germane, but I'm doubting its veracity. And you can talk to Joss like that. And he said, yeah, okay, fine. And so we stopped. So there are like lots of calls you have to make in terms of how the subjects are reacting. This is Boldheart. Bo died of an overdose a year and a half ago. So the last year that I went, I thought, okay, I've done these 3 completely separate bodies of work. Now, like, I really like digging a hole, and usually when I'm in a hole, I don't try to dig out, I try to dig deeper. But I thought, okay, I have to somehow do something this year to maybe create some work that will link the 3 completely different aspects I shot. So one of the walls in the block was a black brick. So I started using the black brick because it replicated the night shots, even though this is all available light. So I was using just broad light, and there was a lot less drama. But the backgrounds kind of reflected what I was doing in the first year. Also working again more with poses and a kind of painterly aspects to the thing. Also working with backlight like the man, but it wasn't such a heavy backlight. This is Bush. Her baby was born and is not a crack baby and lives with her parents. This is Star. That's Alexandra again. This I have to show you. This is Cheryl, and I want to show you this. Can I do this? This is also Cheryl, same woman, 2 years apart. She came by, the bright one, the one where she's blonde, and she said, "Oh, you're back taking pictures." She said, "Will you take another picture of me?" And I looked and I said, "I don't know you, do I? Like, I took your picture. I think I would have remembered." And she said, "Yeah, you took my picture." And anyway, after some conversation, she says, "I was in the sweater." She actually remembered. She says, probably because she had a copy of the image. She said, "I was in the sweater with the little embroidered bows." And I said, "You're Cheryl?" And she said, "Yeah, that's me." So anyway, so again, what I was doing here was I was sort of taking fairly tight shots of people with a bit of backlight. Again, tight shots with the black wall behind me, posing the people. And this is Dakota. She came down to show me where her breasts had been. That's a boyfriend and a girlfriend. This is Helena. That's Helena. That's Jennifer again. This is Jeff, and I forget her name. I only met her a couple times. That's a mother and a son. She's a heroin addict, and Jeff is a crack addict. And this is Stephanie. Where do we go from here? I met Stephanie, and this is the very first picture I took of her. And let me see if I can get into the next little thing here. Live through this. Overview. I met her a couple more times over probably a month and got to know her, and there was something amazing about her. I was compelled and obsessed with this woman for all the right reasons. And there was something about her honesty and how she could get in touch with her emotions and show them to me that I thought was really quite amazing. One day, after I got to know her a little, I blurted out the words, "Is there something I can do to help you?" That was of all the addicts I met, and my intention going down was not to change them, was not to like I say, colonize them or anything like that. But for some reason, I blurted out the words, "Is there something I can do to help you?" And she asked me to help her get into rehab. And I asked her if that was something she would do, and she said yes. So I said, okay, and I asked her if it would be okay if I documented the process as she moved from where she was to where she wanted to be, and she said, fine. And then she disappeared. And I went to the block over and over again, and I didn't see her. She had been living in the homeless shelter, which was right, actually it exits, the exit door exits right to the block. Later that fall, I was talking to Harmony, the woman who had been falling over, and for a completely different reason, I needed to ask her some questions about purity, and that's a whole other story. But I said, have you seen Steph around? She says, I know exactly where Steph lives, and she took me to Steph's place. Steph had been asked by the Shepherds of Good Hope to move into a risk reduction house. I'm not sure if you're familiar with risk reduction, but it's a sociological idea that if you take people at risk and give them a safer environment, that will then help them to move forward with their lives. So she was living in a place called Bridget's Place, which was a house with 11 drug-addicted prostitutes, and they each had their own room. And the door is always locked. They're staffed 24 hours a day, and even the tenants in the house have to ring to get in. They're allowed to have 2 visitors a day, and usually the visitors are pimps, muggers, or drug pushers. So anyway, I went to the door, and Harmony took me to the door, and I rang the bell, and Stephanie opened the door. And I said, do you remember me? And she said, yeah, I remember you. And I said, do you remember what we had agreed? And she said, yes. And I said, well, do you want to do it? And she said, yeah, I still want to do it. So I went back 2 days later into her room and went up and said, she actually said, actually, I've just cooked some heroin and I'm about to inject it. Would you like to take pictures of that? And I said, okay. And she told me that she injects it in her neck. And this is the first picture of Live Through This. This is lit. I'm not a documentary photographer. I'm a portrait photographer. It's only choreographed in the sense of I asked her to sit in the right place. We shot a couple test shots to look at the light before she stuck it in her neck. And then she stuck it in her neck, and this is all digital. I took a series of images of her injecting the heroin. And this is about 20 seconds after the needle came out. So we would hang around together. I would go to her room, and we'd just sit and talk. Sometimes we'd go for sodas. This picture was taken in December. This is how she would walk around in the winter. Again, a lit image with a chosen background. This is in her room. The drop behind her was a bedspread she put over her window. And this is her in my studio. This is the door to her room. We got to know each other as the trust developed. For a lot of times we would sit and there'd be silence. We didn't quite what to make of each other. But we're getting to know each other, and we're beginning to learn to trust each other. And one day I asked her if I could photograph her sleeping, and she said yes, and she gave me the key to her room, and I went in and photographed her sleeping. Again, this is a lit photograph because there was no light in that room. She always sleeps on the outside of the bed, and all her paraphernalia is always on the inside. That comes from living in homeless shelters where you got to protect your stuff. This is Stephanie waking up. It looks real, but actually I put my light away, and then she stretched, and I said, I want to take a picture of that. So I put my light back up, and she did it again. She's a great actress. This is her bedspread. That's some crack cocaine. all this work, there's a lot of aspects to this story, and my friend Don Weber, who just published a book called Interrogations, which is an amazing series of images of people being interrogated by Ukrainian police, he's been posting on Facebook a series of photo book tips by, and I can't pronounce the Dutch fella's name, but he's a really famous Dutch photo book designer. And one of the tips was throw almost all the images out and throw most of the story out. You have to sort of cut it down to the chase. And I'm working now with this work, creating a sequence of images that will work as a book. And one thing I've learned from being published in magazines, having exhibitions, doing portfolios, and working in books is what works on the wall of a gallery probably it cannot be just transposed into a book. They're completely different mediums, and you have to sort of treat each one differently. But in the book, there's no words in it except at the end, it's Stephanie's life story told in her words. But there are photographs of Stephanie's notes, and I'll read, I'm not sure if you can, well, I'll read it. Mark, hey you, how's life treating you? It's been all right out here. Besides, on Friday morning, they found native Pauline, not the Pauline that we know, but they found Pauline dead in the river, dead. Then tonight, which is Friday, they found Melissa Glasner at Daryl's in the basement. Fuck, man, people are going crazy. You are definitely not missing anything. And that's Stephanie High. Stephanie didn't have any papers, and in Canada you need a health card to get access to health services. Once you have the health card, it's free, but they won't accept you unless it's an emergency, which addiction is not. Addiction's a chronic thing. So we had to go to various places to get paperwork in order. This is at a social services office where we were getting some papers signed, and I was becoming Stephanie's next of kin in Ottawa and having certain access to some of her documents. And while we were in the room, I asked her caseworker if I could take photographs. The woman said, yes, just don't put me in it. And partway through, I mean, it was just boring pictures of Stephanie sitting talking to a woman. So partway through, there's a bit of a lull, and I said, Steph, can you go and stand in the corner? I wanted to sort of show her cornered in this really sort of banal, austere, white place. And the woman sort of looking at us going, what's going on? I said, I'm doing a project, it'll be okay. So Stephanie went and stood in the corner. And we drive around. She'd actually disappeared for a week, and then I found her, and this was the picture I took of her when I found her. I put her in the car and took her home. And then in the book, this is another thing. The first time I met Tony was the picture in the bikini top / shorts. I walked up to him and his assistants and asked what was up. What were they doing? They explained that they were taking pictures of the crack addicted and heroin addicts, and Tony asked to take my picture, and I said yes. I seen Tony again after, and he took my picture, and we were chatting about the things, how things were going, and it wasn't until the next time I seen Tony when we were sitting on the block discussing again how things were going on my end, and like every day as a heroin junkie, it sucked. I woke up every day sick. Then he asked me, what can I do to help, or is there anything? And that's when I asked, could you help me get me into rehab? He asked, is it something I would do? And I said yes, and he agreed. And then it sort of goes on to talk about how I met Harmony, and we got together. One of the things Stephanie asked me to do is she was sure that when she went through rehab, her body would change, because she'd seen that in all her other drug associates, she called them, who had got straight. So she asked me to take a picture of her body. So that was one of those. We finally got a birth certificate for her. This is just a descriptive photograph of Steph holding up the birth certificate. And you know, life goes on. And eventually, once we got the birth certificate, I got her a health card. And a couple days later, I took her to the Royal Ottawa Mental Health Institute, and she was interviewed by the physicians there. And an interesting thing happened is the first interview is a drop-in interview, where you fill out a form to be put in a queue, and then a doctor will phone you an interview to see how much you want to get into rehab, because there's only so many spaces. The website at the Royal Ottawa said that you could drop in between 9 and noon, and between 1 and 4. So I went to pick Stephanie up at 10, but with her, nothing was ever straight. First of all, she had to go get some heroin, then we could get the heroin, then she had to go and inject it, so we injected it, and then we walked into the hospital, and it was 5 to noon, and as we walk into the little waiting room there at the Substance Abuse Center, the receptionist looks up and said, yes, what do you want? And I said, well, we came to fill out the form this is Stephanie, and I'm helping her try to get into rehab, and she wants to fill out the form because she wants to enroll in the program. And the woman says, well, we close at noon. And I looked up at the clock, and I said, well, it's 5 to noon. And the woman says it would take 7 minutes to fill out the form. And Stephanie was obviously in distress. So this civil servant made us go to the cafeteria and wait for an hour and 5 minutes because she didn't want to be 2 minutes late for her lunch. So when you get into the system, you can understand maybe why the addicts question the ways and the means that the man tries to make them conform. If that's your initial intercourse with people that are there to help you, you can't help but wonder, what are they concerned with? Are they concerned with retirement and not being late for lunch, or are they concerned with me? So it's kind of a stumbling block, I think. But an interesting thing happened. She filled out the form, and she was given, she was told, actually, Steph doesn't have a phone, so they were going to phone me for the next appointment. And about 6 weeks later, they phoned me up and said, come to the hospital, like Thursday at 9 in the morning, and Stephanie will meet with the doctor. And about half an hour after that phone call, I got a phone call from Heather Badenoch, who's the PR corporate relations person at the Royal Ottawa Hospital. And she says to me, I understand you're coming in with Stephanie on Thursday. And I said, how do you know? And she says, I've been following your blog since the beginning, and so have the clinicians. And it turns out so have the police. I was actually blogging about this every week. I have a blog that I publish every Sunday, and one of the things that Stephanie and I decided to do after much deliberation and discussion and consternation was I wanted to blog about what was happening with Stephanie every week. So I use the term reality show, but that's, I think, sort of making too light of it. So people were tuning in to my blog every Sunday to see what was going on in Stephanie's life. And I remember one week I met her on the road, and I said, how are you doing? And she said, oh, Corey just died. Corey's her ex-boyfriend. Corey just died of an overdose. I had given Stephanie a little point-and-shoot camera, and she had a really blurry picture of Corey. So that Sunday, the title of my blog is Dead, and it's just a blurry picture of Corey, and then a discussion about me bumping into Stephanie and stuff like that. But Stephanie would say, she would tell me she'd be walking down the street, and the cops would talk to her about the stuff they'd read on my blog. But anyway, to get back to the hospital, Heather had been, the PR person at the hospital, said, we've been following your blog, and we actually want to support you. And you're not allowed to take pictures in the hospital, but I will accompany you, and you can take pictures wherever you want as long as you don't show other people. And if the clinicians say you're not allowed in a room, you're not allowed in a room. So I said, that's great. And then I said, you should change your website. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it says the drop-in portion is open from 9 to noon, but it should say 9 to quarter to 12 because we went there at 5 to noon and we were made to wait for an hour and 5 minutes. She says, when was this? And I said, what are you doing? She says, I'm taking notes. So hopefully, I didn't really want to tell tales out of school, but I thought it was just really sort of horrible how they missed it. So hopefully Heather will be able to do something about the reception that addicts get when they go for help. So anyway, we carried on and waiting for her second appointment, and then she got her second appointment. She was accepted, and in the meantime, she was using drugs the whole time. This is a bindle of heroin. That's about $40 worth of heroin. That's Steph cooking it, injecting it. This is just after the shot. That's Steph reading poetry in her room. Steph was always pushing something out of her skin, little like pustules and things out of her eye. It was really kind of hard to be around sometimes. That's Steph in her room in a lot of pain. The pain goes away. She was given a starting date for her rehab, and 5 days before she was going to go into rehab, she phoned me up. It was a Tuesday at 7 in the morning. Sorry, it was a Monday at 7 in the morning. And she told me it felt like her brain was exploding. So I went down to get her. The people at the house where she was living, when Steph complained about something wrong with her head, gave her 2 frozen bananas to hold against her head. True story. can't make this stuff up. So I went to pick Stephanie up, and I said, is it like, she said it's really bad. And I said, well, do you want to go to the hospital? Yeah, we got to go to Dan's first. So she went and she got some heroin, but even that wouldn't stop the pain. So I took her to emergency, and I dropped her off, and I had to go and do a shoot. And I came back 5 hours later, and Stephanie was still waiting to go into an MRI. She had been in initially, she was withdrawing from heroin at this point, and the doctors weren't really giving her anything for it. So when I went back, I told the doctor that she was a heroin addict and that she was going to leave unless they could give her something to alleviate it. So the doctor says, well, we can give you 10 milligrams of morphine. And Steph at this point weighed 88 pounds. And Steph laughed and said, dude, I do 80 of those before breakfast. He could not believe how much dope this woman could take. So she finally went into the MRI. They knocked her out. They gave her 10 milligrams of morphine and knocked her out, put her into the MRI. And I was waiting in observation, and they wheeled her in, and then a few hours later the doctor came and said they found an abscess in her brain and they were going to have to do brain surgery on her. And they took her immediately to the neurological ward at a different hospital in Ottawa in an ambulance. And she phoned me up 4 hours later from a public phone in the neurology ward, and she said, go to Dan's and get me some heroin. She says, they're not giving me anything, they're going to operate on my brain, I can't do this. So I said, I'm not getting any heroin. Like, you're there, you stay there, and they're going to, you got to deal with this, you can't run away from this. And then we started arguing, and there was a really loud fight, and someone in the background said, keep your voice down, and she told him to fuck off, and some kind of scuffle ensued, and the line went dead. And when I went the next day to her room, she had a 24-hour guard, and they were convinced I was bringing her heroin, so the guard just never, and I wasn't allowed to take photographs because Stephanie had to sign a release, and she was in no condition to sign a release. So for a number of days, there were no photographs. This is Stephanie in the hospital, and I couldn't sneak them because the guard was looking. A lot of this work is not portraiture, obviously. It's dealing with just the things as they were unrolling, and most of it was shot with a $400 point-and-shoot camera, which was very easy to conceal and sneak pictures. Steph had her operation, and 3 days later, she was supposed to stay in the hospital for 6 weeks. 3 days later, she phoned me up and she said, I can't heal here, I want to go home. And I said, where's home? And she said, your house. So I went to the hospital, and there was a kind of a fight between the neurologists and the sociologists at the hospital. The neurologist said, this girl can't leave, she'll die. And the sociologist said, this is not the gulag, she's allowed to make bad decisions. So that lasted about an hour, these doctors discussing about whether she should be Form 1, which in Canada means that they're allowed to physically and chemically restrain you. You can't leave. And they decided that she was not Form 1. So she was allowed to leave and come to my house. And she was given a big pile of meds, and she was told to take 3 of these pills every 4 hours or she was going to die. And then as we were leaving, the nurse pulled me aside and said, we're signing her out to you. And I said, yes. And she said, you should know that in the first week, there's a 50% chance she's going to die. So fortunately, my wife, Cindy, is very cool. And Cindy knew Stephanie. Stephanie had been to the house a number of times. So we brought Stephanie home, and this is Stephanie in the elevator leaving the hospital. She couldn't even stand up. A lot of the times when I was working with Stephanie, a lot of stuff happened and I wouldn't photograph it because what I was doing is I was just dealing with the situation on the ground. In this case, I took 3 frames and I put the camera back in my pocket and just dealt with getting Stephanie from the hospital to my house. Her mother, who Stephanie hadn't seen for 4 years, knew that she was working with a photographer, but they didn't know anything about it. They hadn't seen the blog. They just knew that there was something where some man was trying to help her. The day that Stephanie was diagnosed with the brain tumor, Stephanie said, phone my mother. Her name's Karen McDonald, is Stephanie's mother's name. And she gave me her phone number. She lives in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. So I phoned up Karen the next day and said, you don't know me, but I'm a photographer and I've been working with your daughter, and they've just diagnosed her with, they just found a tumor in her brain. They're not sure if she's going to live. So you're invited to come And Karen said, well, are there any cheap hotels there? And I said, well, you can stay with my wife and I. So it took Karen, they're a very poor family, it took Karen a week to scrape together the $300 to fly down. Just so happened that the day Stephanie checked out of the hospital was the day. Stephanie and I get from the hospital to my house. 10 minutes later, her mother walks in. And this is a picture of her mother combing her hair. There's only 2 pictures in the whole series because I'm a portrait photographer where there's other people or some kind of other context. I wanted to kind of strip context away and see if I could tell the story just by pictures of one woman. The next day we got up and Stephanie wasn't in bed. She'd run away and the bottle of meds was on the table. So we went down to the block and we found her, and this is what she looked like when we brought her home. She was kind of crazy for 4 days. She was kind of withdrawing from heroin, but also she wasn't taking heroin. She was buying low doses of Dilaudids, which they call in the street dillies, and you get dilly 2, dilly 4, dilly 6, and dilly 8, which is the milligram. And she was buying dilly 2s and dilly 4s. She was giving them to me and say, only give me 1 pill every 4 hours. So she was actually weaning herself. And I said, I'm not going to be the boss of you. And I put the pills on the table. And she would knock on my door, and sometimes it'd be 3 in the morning. She'd knock on my bedroom door, and she'd say, Tony, can I have a pill? And I'd say, you know where they are, go get them. And she'd say, no, you give it to me. So she was relying on me to sort of control her drug intake. But she would also curl up in her room, the room she was staying in her house, and cry and moan, and I would go in to feel her. Well, if she was moaning, I knew she was alive. Every morning I go in to feel her to see if she was still warm, to see if she died. But then I would say, you know, is there anything you can do? And she said, get me a pill. And I said, well, you know, can you wait a little while? And she'd say, okay. And then I'd close the door and just leave her there crying. It was kind of over the top. This is where they operated on her, and she was making notes. She's an inveterate note taker. It's a picture of Stephanie. This is about 3 days after she had come to my house. This is where they operated. So this is her injecting a low dose of Dilaudid. Stephanie weighs 88 pounds. Then after about 4 days of being crazy and wild and running down to the block to buy stuff and to meet her friends, she started to sleep. And she would sleep for 8 or 10 hours, and she would get up and eat a bowl of Cheerios, and she'd inject some Dilaudid, and she'd go and she'd sleep. Then she'd get up and do the same thing over, and we never knew when she was going to get up, and I was sort of thinking, okay, well, something's happening. She was recovering. And then after 8 days, she got up and she was kind of like, not normal, but she'd come through something. And this is her watching 2.5 Men. That's my dog, Lily. You can see how focused she is. That's her at the hospital. We went back to get her sutures removed. That's her loving the situation and eating chips. And then that's her waiting to go to the airport. And that's her at the airport. About a week after she woke up, she said she wanted to go home. She wanted to be with her family, her son. She wanted to be close to her mother. The Shepherds of Good Hope had told her they would buy her a bus ticket, which takes 22 hours to get from Ottawa to there. So I bought her a plane ticket. She'd never been on a plane before, and we sort of pack everything up and go to the airport. And she looked at me, she said, I got $20 in my sock. I said, let's just go to the airport. She says, no, let's go to the block. So I said, Steph. She says, just she was still smoking crack. She said, just one last rock. So we drove down to the block, and she bought some rock, and we're driving to the airport, and she's like smoking crack in the car on the way to the airport. She'd never been in a plane before, and she had to go through security. And, she looked kind of iffy. So I said to her, Steph, if they question you at security about why you look iffy, just show them the back of your head. But she just waltzed right through. 3 months later, I went to Nova Scotia, to New Glasgow, to see how she was doing. And she had found a room in a house. She was on methadone. She'd signed herself onto welfare. That's the door to her room. And this is her 3 months later, after she left my house. She looks like a warrior. We drove the next day to Halifax, where she was going to be have her doctor in Halifax look at her. And the doctor did some blood tests. They had done previous blood tests and checked her out. And her infection was gone, so she didn't have to take meds anymore. So we got to have a bit of a holiday, Stephanie and I. She took me to, this is the house she grew up in. It didn't look like that when she was growing up. And this is her in front of an open pit coal mine. She pretended to fall over the edge. Blew my mind. That's the back of her head where they did the operation. She had outstanding warrants, which is the reason she moved to Ottawa in the first place, because she was wanted in Nova Scotia. So I said, Steph, do you want to go to legal aid and get a lawyer and try to sort of deal with that? And she said, okay. So we go to legal aid, and we go up, and Steph says, I want a lawyer. And the woman says, why? And she says, well, I have outstanding warrants. And the woman said, did you run? And Steph said, yeah. And the woman says, well, I'm supposed to actually hold you and call the police. You don't get a lawyer before you go to jail. You get a lawyer after you go to jail. So the woman says, I'm going to walk slowly to the phone, and you decide whether you want to stay or go. So Steph says, let's go. So we went to the beach. That's Stephanie and her mom. That's at her grandmother's house. That's Stephanie and her son, Cole. When Stephanie left, Cole was 6 months old. Here he's 4.5. It just so happened that evening, Cole was going to graduate from kindergarten. And so this is Stephanie in my motel room getting ready to go to her son's graduation. And that's Stephanie waiting to see Cole, and there's Cole about to graduate. And then I left the next day, and this is the last picture I took of Stephanie. And that's kind of the end of the story, because it's about those 9 months that we spent together. So like I say, this work is not really about photography. It's just about a guy with a camera involved in a situation. And like I said at the beginning, a lot of my practice has to do with going out and meeting people and putting myself in situations where I'm uncomfortable. I have a feeling that most of middle-class, first-world people suffer from chronic comfort, and as do I. And a lot of what I do to remove that comfort from my life, because I believe the comfort will kill you. My mother went on a cruise with her second husband, who's kind of rich, down the Danube in like a little room, and it was sort of like sitting in your living room, cruising down the Danube. And in Hungary, she took sick, and they took her to a Hungarian hospital and put her in a ward with Hungarian people for 3 days. And she had to eat Hungarian food, which other people were bringing, and deal with the Hungarian society. And when she came back from her trip, the only thing she could talk about was her 3 days in the Hungarian hospital, because they made such an impact on her, because she was taken away from what was normal for her. So I actually came up with an idea of a travel agent that will send you to East European hospitals. So if anyone wants to sign up, maybe I'll put it online soon. So anyway, to sort of recap, to me, the very first thing, the user thing, which led to this, was very much about photography, about me working with people, but also sort of trying to bring a lot of my own proclivities and intellect to the process, and then try to package that in a way in the final edit that would sort of show aspects of those people's fact. The second thing was a guy with a camera. Almost everything was out of my control, and I was just sort of reacting to whatever was happening in front of me and trying to make sense of it. But in the end, I think, like I started off saying at the very beginning, to me that's what photography is about. You take chaos and you take that chaos and somehow turn it into order. And if you can get the right order, other people will be able to understand it as well. So that's the end of my thing, but I'm willing to entertain questions. If anyone, oh yes. Oh, I think we have a microphone.
Thank you, Tony. That was a really honest talk. Very moving.
Thank you.
And this may be hard, but I'm wondering if you could talk about how you personally were changed by the interactions with the people, with Stephanie. So how you and your worldview and what changed for you?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because in the spring of 2007, I had kidney failure, and I was about 10 hours away from dying. And then funnily enough, that summer I start doing the Crack Addict Project. I'm not sure. I was convinced after my kidney failure episode that it didn't change me. Being that close to death had not changed me. I'm a slow learner. But after a while, I realized that it actually had, and I started to care a lot less about some things and a lot more about others. And I think the same happened with both these projects. I knew when I came back from the block, I would be kind of frazzled. There was a lot of data that had been going in my head that wasn't the most pleasant. But there was also data that was going in my head that was beautiful, and I saw that the society on that block, I saw street mothers looking after young women. I saw them policing themselves. I saw women rarely being abused by the addicts. I saw a lot of really, really kind of interesting and in one way beautiful things about this. In a way, like classical anarchy. It was kind of like a primitive society, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. But I would come home from that, and I would be, Cindy could always tell when I was down there, because it's like, oh, you're a little screwed up. So it was like a lot of work to process. And I would hear about people dying, and I'd hear about people getting better. So that really, that sort of affected me in a kind of a deep way, but didn't really get processed forward much. And then the Stephanie thing really screwed me up. It took, I think, and I know post-traumatic stress syndrome is really knocked around, but it wasn't until a little while ago that I thought, gee, I wonder if I have that. Can you get that from doing that? It took me a number of months to recover, just from the intensity, from the not knowing, from having a woman living upstairs that has a 50% chance of dying. And all that stuff kind of took a toll on me, but the other thing that took a toll, and this is going to sound really sort of horrible, was the drama deficit in my life. It's like my life, and Cindy says, I would complain about it, and Cindy says, you love it. And so when that gets subtracted, it kind of felt like there was a vacuum. And I can imagine, and I'm not comparing this in any way to the servicemen coming back from war, but I can imagine what there must be when you feel a vacuum. I was photographing Jean Charest, who's the Premier of Quebec, but used to be the leader of the Federal Conservative Party. And was he the Prime Minister at any point? No, he wasn't, but he was leader of the opposition. And I asked him if he felt a vacuum going from being, almost the top dog in Canada to being, sort of nothing, and then the Premier of Quebec. And he talked a little about, yeah, you do feel vacuums when that stress and the intensity and the importance that you feel of something you're doing is removed. So all those things sort of came together and kind of affected me, and now I'm taking 4x5 pictures of buildings. So it's really boring.
This is a really simple question. How old was Stephanie?
Stephanie was 23 when I met her. She turned 24 the day before she left to go back to Nova Scotia, and she would be 25 now. So yeah, a young woman.
Have you been in touch with her at all since?
We email all the time. We're working on her life story. In fact, in the book, when you get to the last page, there's going to be a separate booklet that you pull out, and the first words are, it's in Stephanie's voice, and she's an amazing writer. She doesn't use spell check, and she uses lots of, is it called malapropris? How do you say that word? When she had her headache, she wanted to say she thought it was a migraine, but she wrote mind-grain. So she uses lots of, it's just sort of like amazing. You can hear her speak when she writes. But when you get to the last page of the book, there'll be this booklet, and the first words you'll read is, my first memory as a child is picking blueberries in my grandmother's backyard. So which is, I think, part of the reason we want to do a pull-out booklet of her life is because I want the book of photographs and her, which is my take, and her words to be two discrete entities, which is kind of what the project was, two people coming together. And we just really wanted something from each other. She wanted to get straight, and I wanted to take pictures. But of course, as time went on, that distance really shrunk, which is actually a lot of what my practice is about. I like shrinking distance between myself and the person I'm photographing. She relapsed about 3 weeks ago. The police found her in New Glasgow, overdosed. They took her to the hospital. She'd been straight for a year. They took her to the hospital and revived her and cut her loose. And then she phoned me about 4 days ago from a hospital bed, and she has hepatitis C. Her kidneys had failed. And she's on methadone now, and for some reason they weren't giving her methadone in the hospital. I'm not exactly sure why. And Canadian healthcare system. And she signed herself out rather than withdraw. And then she sent me an email the next day that said she's probably going to have to go on dialysis. But I believe that she won't, and that she probably will die.
talked a little bit about subjectivity and objectivity and the criticism that you got. And I kind of find it refreshing that you don't really care about the criticism and you don't really care about walking whatever that objective fine line is. You seem to disregard it completely. So my question is kind of just about, you've completely removed that barrier with Stephanie so much more than you did with the addicts, and it doesn't seem like you have any regrets, but would you do it again? Would you recommend this?
Yes, I recommend it. I know that not everyone can do. I also teach photography at school, and the students sometimes say to me, well, we can't do that because we don't have your personality. How can we proceed? And I say, and what they want to do is they want to do photographs of people they meet on the street. So I say, well, really the only way to proceed is to be honest. And don't be honest. You can't be honest by trying to be me. You can only be honest by trying to be yourself. And they say, well, what do you mean? And the example I give them is one of my ex-assistants, Christina. She wanted to sort of do what I was doing, and she didn't know how to do it. And I said, Christina, go up to someone who you want to photograph and tell them the truth. And she says, well, what's the truth? And I said, the truth is that you want to learn how to take pictures of people on the street. You don't know what you're doing. There's something about that person that attracts you. Would they mind if you work with them a little while to try to do something together? That's honest. And to me, my sense is that when you're honest with people, like, they know. People know when you're being honest. And if you go into situations with sort of weird motives, although some people might think my motives are weird, but sort of non-righteous motives, I believe people will sniff that out a mile away. So what you have to do as photographers, I believe, is you have to try to figure out what your honesty is, what your motives are, what are you trying to do, and then you just talk about that to the people. When I do projects in the States, I travel with a portfolio, and we sit down and I'll talk to someone for 15 or 20 minutes before I even bring the camera out. You know, I ask them questions, they ask me questions, usually about whether Canada is a socialist country or not. And then at that point, after there's been some kind of contact created, that's when we move forward. And as I said at the very beginning of the talk, to me, that's what my practice is about. It's about going out into the world, getting lost, finding things, and then trying to understand them and represent them in a way. That's what I love doing. So I think the honest aspect is something that is just really, really key. And I also believe that if you're not honest when you're taking the pictures, not only will the subjects know, but the people who view them will also know that you're bogus.
Do we have any more questions?
Come on, one more. Who's brave? Okay, thank you very much.
I'd like to thank you all for being here. Thank you to Tony Fouhse for a fantastically interesting journey he just took us on. Thank you to our live stream audience. Make sure that you go upstairs and check out the exhibit upstairs and the printed matter and indie photo book library. We will have an event here at 5 o'clock tonight to wrap up the festival, so please be sure you come to that. And our next panel, which starts at noon, is with Tina Ahrens, who's the co-founder of Emphasis, a crowdfunding site for photography projects. So please come back for that. Thank you very much.